Our gospel passage this week is from the book of Matthew. This is chapter 15, verses 10 through 28. Then he called the crowd to him and said to them, "Listen and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but it is what comes out of the mouth that defiles." Then the disciples approached and said to him, "Do you know that the Pharisees took offense when they heard what you said?" He answered, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if one blind person guides another, both will fall into a pit." But Peter said to him, "Explain this parable to us." And then he said, "Are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and goes out into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile." Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. Last week, we read a different story from Matthew from the previous chapter, chapter 14. And in that story, Jesus walks across the water to his disciples who are caught in a windstorm out on the sea. And in that story, Jesus calls out to his disciples and he says, "It is I," or "I am. Do not be afraid." And Peter says, "If it is you, Lord, command me to come to you by walking on the water." And Jesus indulges this request. Peter gets out of the boat. He takes a few steps, but then he gets scared because the wind is so strong and he starts to sink. And Jesus reaches out to him. He grabs his arm and he pulls him up out of the water. They both get into the boat, and the wind ceases, and the disciples confess to Jesus, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And they worship him. And today we are moving to the next chapter in Matthew, chapter 15. And this passage, at least that second half of the passage, I think to our ears maybe Jesus doesn't come across as quite so regal or dignified. You might say he seems a little bit more human in this interaction. And I think this story is probably one that makes many of us uncomfortable. Personally, I wince every time I read it. When I read Jesus referring to this Canaanite woman as a dog. And it's especially difficult to hear him use this language right after walking across water and exhibiting his divinity. And it makes me wonder, this is how the divine Son of God refers to a woman who seeks him out just looking for some help. But before we get to that issue, I want to look just briefly at what has happened between the walking on water and today's scenes. So after Jesus calms this storm out on the sea, he and the disciples go to Gennesaret. And when they get there, Jesus chooses to heal all of the sick people that come to him. And then we learn that some Pharisees and scribes have come from Jerusalem to see Jesus. And they approach him and they challenge him. They say, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat? And what they mean is, why don't your disciples follow this tradition of the elders, this particular way of interpreting the Mosaic law that the Pharisees and the scribes followed? And Jesus answers by criticizing them. He says that they elevate their own traditions above the Mosaic law itself, and he calls them hypocrites. And that brings us to the passage for today, where Jesus offers a teaching on things that defile a person. So he says, eating without washing your hands, the disciples don't need to worry about this. This is not what defiles a person. It is the things that come out of the mouth that defile, things that come out of the heart. And this upsets the Pharisees and the scribes. Jesus tells them, his disciples, you don't need to worry about them. They're the blind leading the blind. And that brings us to the more difficult section of today's passage. So Jesus has gone into this district of Tyre and Sidon, and this was a predominantly Gentile area. Though there was a small Jewish community that lived there, it was mostly non-Jews. And as he's walking, a Canaanite woman approaches him. She calls out to him, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, my daughter is tormented by a demon." And there's actually a version of this same story in Mark's gospel. And we think that Mark's version of the story is the earlier one, that Matthew probably used Mark's version. And in Mark's version, the woman is called Syrophoenician. So it seems that Matthew has changed this description to Canaanite for some reason. And Canaanite actually would have been the more pejorative term. It had more of a negative connotation than Syrophoenician, at least for Jews. The Canaanites were the indigenous people who lived in the land before the Israelites got there. They were obviously pagan. They did not worship Yahweh. And they were some of Israel's oldest and fiercest enemies. So to give you a little taste, maybe, of how the Israelites thought about Canaanites in that time, this is a passage from Deuteronomy that speaks about them. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away the many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, etc., nations mightier and more numerous than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. For that would turn away your children from following me to serving other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. So, clearly, some strong feelings about Canaanites, some pretty clear instructions. But what jumps out to me from that passage the most is the phrase, "show them no mercy." And this is exactly what the Canaanite woman is asking for. Those are her words. The first thing she says is, "Have mercy on me, Son of David." As a kind of an interesting side note, anybody remember how the Gospel of Matthew begins? Yeah, his genealogy. Yeah. Matthew begins with the genealogy of Jesus. So it starts, an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And I'm guessing that when many of us come to the genealogies in the Bible, tend to skip over them. They're boring. They don't mean much to us. We don't have much context for them. But genealogies do have messages. And in Jesus's genealogy that Matthew offers, in Jesus's own line, there happened to be 3 Canaanite women, Rahab, Tamar, and Ruth. So Jesus, Israel's Messiah, the son of David, the son of God, has Canaanite ancestry. So back to the passage, Jesus initially ignores this woman. And when his disciples tell him to send her away, he tells her, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And this really does fit with Jesus's understanding of his mission. God made a covenant with Israel. They are God's chosen people. This is how God chose to reveal himself in the world. And so it makes sense that Israel's Messiah would attend to them first, to gather in their lost sheep. That is Jesus's first priority. And you could see this as unfair. That is a valid feeling. The entire idea about a chosen people, I think to our modern ears, can offend us and our sensibilities. But you can also see Jesus's mission as reaching out to the lost sheep of Israel first, as a manifestation of God's faithfulness to that particular covenant. God promised that this is what he would do, and he's following through on the promise. Even so, the woman is not deterred by this answer. She bows down before Jesus, a sign of worship, and she says, Lord, help me. And this is when Jesus says, it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Ouch. The word for dogs here is actually little dogs or puppies. I don't know if that helps at all. May have referred to pets at the time, might not have sounded as harsh to them as it does to us. Either way, there's no around it. It sounds dehumanizing. But surprisingly, the woman challenges Jesus after this. She contends with him, and she actually changes Jesus's mind. He's impressed with her faith, and he chooses to heal her daughter. So the question is, what are we to make of this story of Jesus' interaction with this woman? We see a tension at play here in the story of Jesus coming face to face with one of Israel's oldest enemies, with someone who was absolutely unclean by the standards of the law, a pagan who, according to the law in Deuteronomy, was not to be shown mercy. And yet she approaches Israel's Messiah asking for exactly that, mercy from Jesus. Matthew is the gospel writer who goes to the greatest lengths to show that Jesus and his ministry were actually the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy and Jewish tradition. It's why he opens the gospel with that genealogy. He's saying, this Jesus is the one that you have been waiting for. He's the real deal, descendant of David, but then also with that strange twist, also a descendant of some Canaanites, the despised, unclean people. And in the Hebrew scriptures, there was always the conviction that eventually, the entire world would be brought into the fold of the people of Israel. That was the plan from the beginning. I've been rereading Genesis recently, And even in that very first covenant that God made with Abraham, God says, yes, I will make a great nation of you. But also, and even more importantly, you are going to be a blessing for the entire world. That's the direction that this thing is moving in. But the broadening of Israel and who is included in God's promises, this was a continual struggle for the Israelites. We see that struggle continue in the book of Acts as the church tries to figure out whether Gentile Christians should also follow the law. We see the struggle continuing in Paul's letters. And in this interaction with the Canaanite woman, we see a glimpse of the church's future mission and future struggles, to be honest. Jesus was focused on his immediate mission, gathering in the lost sheep of the chosen people. That was the first step, the first phase of the broader mission. And yet, this Canaanite woman challenges Jesus with her faith. She exemplifies his teaching that it is what comes out of the mouth, out of the human heart, that defiles, but also that makes a person clean and holy. I am still not sure what to do with Jesus's words to her that seem offensive. I wish they weren't there, but they are. But I also don't think that they are the center or the most significant aspect of this story. I actually see this woman in a way as holding Jesus to his word. And I am grateful that the scriptures are honest about the internal tensions contained in God's redemption of the world. Amen.